In January of 1947, 4,700 American soldiers were sailing toward Antarctica. 13 warships, 33 aircraft, submarines, an aircraft carrier. The largest military expedition ever sent to the frozen continent. It was planned to last 6 months. It ended in 8 weeks. 3 of its aircraft never came home. The admiral who commanded it returned through Chile and gave an interview that the United States government has spent the better part of 70 years trying to explain. He spoke of an enemy capable of flying from pole to pole at speeds no aircraft on Earth could match. They called it alarmism. They called it metaphor. They called it whatever they needed to call it. But the interview exists. The photographs exist. The official reports exist. And the question no one in power wants to answer still exists with them. I am Aeon. I do not ask you to believe me. I ask you to look at the evidence. What I am about to show you is not theory. It is documented. Every fact in this account can be verified through the United States Naval Archives, through the personal papers of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, and through the newspapers of January and March of 1947. The mission was real. The scale was real. The early withdrawal was real. The interview was real. What it all means is the only thing that remains in dispute. Stay with me, and by the end of this, you will understand why a routine scientific expedition turned into one of the most quietly classified events of the early Cold War. The operation was officially titled the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program. The shorthand name, the one history would remember, was Operation Highjump. On paper, the purpose was straightforward. The Navy wanted to test cold weather equipment. They wanted to train personnel for polar conditions. They wanted to map the coastline of Antarctica using aerial photography. And they wanted to establish a research base called Little America 4 on the Ross Ice Shelf. That was the public story. That was what appeared in the press releases. Now consider what was actually sent. 13 ships, including the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea, the submarine USS Senate, 2 seaplane tenders, 2 destroyers, a communications ship, an icebreaker, a tanker, and 4 support vessels. 33 aircraft, including 6 R-4D Skytrains and 6 float-equipped seaplanes, 4,700 personnel, including a contingent of Marines. This is not the footprint of a scientific mission. This is the footprint of an invasion force. The expedition departed from Norfolk, Virginia, in early December of 1946. By the end of December, the 3 task groups had reached the edge of the Antarctic ice. Aerial mapping flights began on the 17th of January, 1947. Over the next several weeks, the aircraft of Operation Highjump photographed approximately 60% of the continent's coastline. 70,000 aerial photographs were taken. Most of them remain in Navy archives. Some were declassified decades later. Others were never released at all. And then, on the 22nd of February, 1947, the mission ended, 8 weeks after it had begun. The official reason given was deteriorating weather conditions. This is the explanation that appears in every textbook. It is the explanation that appears in the official Navy history. It is also the explanation that contradicts the operational plan, which had budgeted for 6 to 8 months of activity. The expedition was prepared, equipped, and supplied for a long stay. It left almost immediately. 3 aircraft were lost during those 8 weeks. The first crashed on the 30th of December, 1946, during a low-altitude flight over the Thurston Island Peninsula. Of the 9 crew members aboard the George I, 6 survived. 3 were killed. Their bodies were not recovered. They remain on the continent to this day, the only Americans buried in Antarctica. The cause of the crash, according to the official report, was disorientation in whiteout conditions. The pilot, Lieutenant Ralph LeBlanc, survived the impact, but was severely burned and died decades later from complications related to his injuries. The survivors waited 13 days on the ice before they were rescued. They wrote a brief account of the crash. Some details in that account did not match the official explanation. The aircraft, according to the survivors, had been flying low to investigate something they had seen on the horizon. What it was, they never specified in writing. The second aircraft was lost on a separate reconnaissance flight. The third was lost during what was officially described as a navigation error. By the time these incidents were being added together, the mission had already begun to wind down. On the 11th of March, 1947, Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the commander of Operation Highjump, gave an interview to the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio. The interview was published on the 13th of March. The original article is preserved in the National Library of Chile. In that interview, Byrd said something that has been quoted, misquoted, and argued about ever since. He said, and I am translating directly from the published Spanish text, that the United States needed to take defensive measures against the possibility of an invasion by hostile aircraft coming from the polar regions. He said these aircraft could fly from one pole to the other at incredible speeds. He said that a future war, if it came, would be a tragedy in which no continent would be safe. That is what the article says. The original article exists. You can read it in the El Mercurio archives. The phrasing has been disputed. Some have argued that Byrd was speaking metaphorically about the threat of long-range Soviet bombers. Others have argued that the Chilean reporter misunderstood him. Others still have argued that he was speaking literally about something he and his men had encountered on the ice. What is not disputed is that Byrd never repeated the statement publicly. He was called back to the United States. He gave no further press interviews on the subject of Antarctica. When he died 14 years later, his diaries were sealed at his family's request. They have never been fully released. There is one more piece of evidence I want you to consider. In 1955, 8 years after Operation Highjump, the United States launched a second Antarctic expedition. It was called Operation Deep Freeze. Byrd commanded it. He was by then 66 years old and in declining health. Deep Freeze was a longer, slower, more openly scientific mission. It established the permanent American research presence on the continent that continues to this day. But before Deep Freeze, Byrd appeared one final time on a Longines television program called Longines Chronoscope. The interview was broadcast on the 7th of May, 1954. In it, the Admiral spoke about polar exploration in general terms. And then, almost in passing, he said this. He said that the most extraordinary part of the world remained to be discovered, that an area at the pole, larger than the United States itself, lay outside the reach of the maps. He used the phrase, that area beyond the pole. Then, he was redirected to other topics. The recording of that interview exists. It is preserved in the Library of Congress Television and Radio Archive. The phrase Byrd used was specific, the area beyond the pole, not the area at the pole, not the area near the pole, the area beyond. Whatever he meant by it, he was choosing his words. So, what do we have? We have a military operation prepared for half a year, ended in 2 months. We have 3 aircraft lost in 8 weeks, an attrition rate well above what any peacetime mission should have produced. We have an admiral describing aircraft that fly from pole to pole at impossible speeds. We have 70,000 aerial photographs, most of which remain classified or partially classified. We have a phrase, the area beyond the pole, spoken on national television by the man who commanded both expeditions. And we have his sealed diaries. What is the mainstream explanation? It is reasonable, and it deserves a fair hearing. The mainstream explanation says that Operation Highjump was an early Cold War exercise designed to test American military capability in extreme conditions. The expedition ended early because of deteriorating ice, because of equipment failures, and because the strategic priorities of the United States Navy shifted in early 1947 toward the developing crisis in Europe. Byrd's interview in Chile, according to this view, was a warning about the future capabilities of Soviet long-range aviation, expressed in dramatic language because Byrd was a dramatic man. This explanation accounts for many of the facts. It does not account for all of them. It does not explain why a man as practiced in public statements as Richard Byrd would describe Soviet bombers as flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds in 1947, when no aircraft anywhere in the world was capable of such a feat. It does not explain why the diaries remain sealed. It does not explain the phrase, "the area beyond the pole." It does not explain why 70,000 aerial photographs of a continent that is, according to mainstream geography, an empty ice sheet would need to remain classified for over half a century. I am not telling you what the answer is. I do not know what the answer is. I am telling you what the documents show and what the documents leave unanswered. There is a question that comes up at this point in every conversation about Operation Highjump. The question is whether the men who served on that expedition saw something. The honest answer is that we do not know. The men who served are mostly dead. The few who lived into the 2000s gave interviews. Most of them said nothing unusual. A few, near the ends of their lives, said things that contradicted the official record. A radio man named John Sykes, in an interview recorded shortly before his death in 2006, said that during the mission, he had heard radio traffic that did not come from any American aircraft. He said the traffic was in a language he did not recognize. He said he reported it to his superiors and was told not to mention it again. That is one man, near the end of his life, in a recorded interview. It is one piece of evidence. It is not proof. It is testimony. You can give it as much or as little weight as you believe it deserves. Here is what I keep returning to. The pattern of secrecy is the most interesting evidence we have, not the conspiracy theories, not the speculations about Nazi bases or alien craft or hollow earth. The pattern itself, a mission scaled for war, a withdrawal that should not have happened, an interview that should not have been given, a phrase that should not have been chosen, diaries that should not have been sealed, photographs that should not have been classified. When a government acts as if it is hiding something, it is not always hiding what we think it is hiding. Sometimes it is hiding incompetence. Sometimes it is hiding political embarrassment. Sometimes it is hiding intelligence sources or methods that are themselves more sensitive than the underlying information. And sometimes, very rarely, it is hiding something we are not prepared to be told. Which of those it is, in the case of Operation Highjump, I cannot tell you. What I can tell you is that the historical record on this mission is full of holes that nothing in the official explanation fully fills. Admiral Byrd died on the 11th of March, 1957, 10 years to the day after his interview was published in Chile. Whatever he knew, he took with him. His diaries remain in the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center at Ohio State University. Some pages have been digitized and released, many have not. The family retains the right to control access. Researchers have requested permission to view certain volumes covering the late 1946 and early 1947 period. Those requests, according to the center's published correspondence, have been declined. The ice has not given up its secrets, neither has the archive. I want to leave you with one final detail. In 2024, a satellite survey of the Queen Maud Land region of Antarctica revealed a feature that had not been documented before. A symmetrical structure partially buried in the ice, approximately 150 meters in diameter. The mainstream interpretation is that it is a natural geological formation, possibly a meteorite crater or a subglacial volcanic feature. The investigation is ongoing. Initial publications are expected in the next 2 to 3 years. Queen Maud Land is the region the Germans surveyed in 1939. It is the region the Americans overflew in 1947. It is the region Admiral Byrd described in 1954 as the area beyond the pole. Whatever is under the ice It has been there for a very long time. And whatever it is, the patterns of the people who have looked for it suggest that it is worth more than the official explanations have ever given it credit for. I am Aeon. I have shown you what survives. The interview, the photographs, the casualties, the phrase, the sealed diaries, the 70,000 images. I will not tell you what they mean. I will tell you that they exist and that the history we were taught does not account for all of them. The truth, if there is one to be had, is buried under miles of ice and decades of silence. Some buried things are meant to stay buried, and some are not.